Disclaimer. The editing in this video that you're about to watch is very poor and may cause psychic damage to you or your family. Watch at your own risk. And that, everyone, is my recap of the past 5 months. All the bits and bobs that I was gone for. Thank you for watching, and don't forget... Did Prigozhin just die? For those of you who are uninitiated, gather around and I will tell you the tale of one of the strangest groups in modern military history. And if you are initiated, skip to this timestamp on screen so that you can just listen to the plain ramble. Back when Crimea was annexed in 2014, Ukrainian intelligence operatives intercepted messages from a man called Dmitry Utkin. I think that's Utkin. I'm gonna say it's Utkin. Talking with GRU Colonel Oleg Inayakov. I'm gonna call that Inayakov as well as Major General, oh my gosh, Yevgeny Nikiforov. We're calling him Nikiforov. Now, Dmitry. Is it Dmitry? I'm just gonna call him Utkin. That's easy. Utkin is what we're gonna use. All right. Yeah, I'm just gonna call him Utkin. But Utkin supposedly founded the Wagner Group as either a frontman or the actual founder. I don't know, and to be honest, I don't want to do the research to find out at the moment. His call sign Wagner became the group's official name, if that means anything, and if you know the history of that name, or anything about the man Utkin himself, you could notice the extreme irony of the Nazi ties all of that has, especially as his group is being sent into Ukraine for denazification of the country, which you know is definitely not ironic at all. This founder was also a former member of the GRU, and from my research, the GRU is basically the closest thing I know of to the actual Illuminati. It runs in the shadow of the KGB, with the same job as both the CIA and NSA, and runs some of its own spies. Basically, it's an intelligence agency that is rather large and doesn't really care about any rules, as far as I can tell. Remember these guys. It might be important later. Or not, I don't know yet, but just stick around and find out. Another person you might know as a founder as well is Mr. Prigozhin. As for him, he needs no introduction. I'm going to give him an introduction anyways. He started out his path to power by going to prison. Twice, for like a lot of stuff, holy moly. After that, he started selling hot dogs, he gambled, opened several restaurants, got catering contracts from the Kremlin itself. You know, suddenly he had a private jet, and here, at around this time, he started Wagner with Utkin, around 2013-2014. Utkin had worked for Prigozhin a few times in the past, mostly doing security for his catering company, in quotation marks. In my opinion, it's likely here that the government stepped in when it comes to the Wagner Group. The GRU ties that Utkin had... Utkin? I'm gonna keep messing up his name all video. Oh man, it's a good thing I don't have to reference him that much. But yeah, that Utkin had ties to the GRU. That's pretty obvious. And then suddenly he got a ridiculous amount of money. I would like to mention, as the editor real quick, that it was not Utkin that got the large amount of money. That was Prigozhin I was referencing. I don't know how I didn't catch it the first time around, but that is meant to be the other bald guy. The kind of bald guy, not the fully bald guy. That's just a little suspicious, don't you think? The group was founded to support the war in the Donbass, but quickly expanded to Africa, South America, and eventually even Syria. To give some background, Syria was split between the US and Russia. Both sides were fighting with ISIS, but they both wanted to support both of their sides. The US supporting the rebels, and the Russians supporting the government of Syria at the time. That's a pretty simplified overview, but this is not a video about Syria. Now, they did have a communications line to make sure that either of them didn't fight each other directly, as, you know, that could cause escalation or something messy, and they didn't really want to deal with it. And it is in this conflict that one of Wagner's first conflicts, if I remember correctly, a very infamous battle happened. US forces spied a collection of around 500 troops and 27 vehicles, including some tanks, approaching a US position of around 30 commandos. It became clear an attack was imminent, and as usual for this type of thing, US command asked the Russian command whether those troops were theirs. as a group of AC-130 gunships, Apache attack helicopters, F-22s, and a few other aircraft readied themselves. Combat started, and U.S. Artillery and Air Command waited. And when the Russian command answered, of course, they answered no. These were in fact not Russians. Not at all. In short, there was not an attacking force afterwards. If you take Wagner fighters' numbers, it's around, 200, 300 died? Around one U.S. ally was wounded, and according to what I've found, sources from Wagner itself say the attack was brutal. That's where the 200 to 300 number comes from. Russian sources say barely anything happened. They report 5 contractor deaths, which I think is pretty stupid. With the reporting history of both organizations, I believe the Wagner story because I'm a biased American who likes seeing stories of U.S. forces go ballistic on something, of course. And because they simply tend to be more reliable, as terrible as they are as an organization. Either way, the Russian command doomed these troops, in either by accident or on purpose. It's, in my opinion, set some things up to come. After Syria, Wagner continued to do security work for parts of Africa. Most deals traded security for access to an absolutely ludicrous amount of access to natural resources. We're talking several planes per day in some cases. Usually including gold, but of course that's not nearly as interesting as what happened in Ukraine, in my opinion. When the invasion started, Wagner was not often in the news. Most of the headlines were Russian failures and Russian advances, so they got lost in the noise. When the Battle of Bakhmut started really getting started, that they were front and center, you see, Russia seems to use regular troops to advance or pressure maybe a weak enemy force or a place where they don't think there's any contention. Usually for the actual assaults or something that it hinges on, they use elite or veteran forces like the VDV, for example, to attack. They seem to not necessarily trust the general forces to do anything other than dig trenches and sit in them. And after all, with that much artillery, that's most of what regular troops have to do anyways. Wagner seems to fill the same niche in a sense as the special forces. In Bakhmut, they were used as the assault troops, intermixed with their own penal battalions, of course, and here they started getting into the spotlight. It was in Bakhmut that Prigozhin started his most famous version of doing something that Russian commanders generally can't do: complain. He complained about ammo and how they were being cut off. Worst of all, he didn't just complain that there was a shortage, he actively cursed and blamed it on military command itself, all the way up to Shoigu in the MOD. As time went on, he would expand these claims from withholding ammunition to outright attacks. Although dissent in Russia is usually seen to be dangerous, it's seen to be almost as a life sentence. There's something else that's even more dangerous that he started cultivating: public respect. He wasn't only complaining about the situation, he was also blaming the government in a very populist way. His soldiers, in the way he described it, were the children of the normal people of the USSR, and he often juxtaposed that with the children of the elites, especially. The best example I can find of this type of rhetoric coming out of him is this quote here: "The children of the elites smother themselves with creams and show this on Instagram, YouTube, and so on, while ordinary people's kids return home torn apart in zinc-lined coffins." Oddly enough, for all of the secrecy that oligarchs and generals and most of the Russian system typically has around it, it almost seemed like a PR campaign. He would go directly against the narratives put out by Russia Today or other Russian media, even state media at times. He would usually claim that the Russian government was incompetent, war was going not well, that the Ukrainian defenders were competent and organized, even at times to say that the war was unwarranted, or that its causes were based on a lie. And usually in Russia, words like that is enough to get you killed. But he lived, and he might as well have stayed living. Unfortunately for him, though, it got worse. On May 27th, Igor Girkin accused Wagner of trying to stage a coup. 2 days later, on the 27th, Prigozhin accused him of trying to stage a coup against the government himself. Early in June, Prigozhin and his Wagner group refused to sign a contract with the Russian military, in which Prigozhin went public saying that the government is corrupt, the war is based on a lie, and that in the end, the military wants to go to war with NATO in a whole. And finally, on the 23rd of June, he accused the Russian military of attacking him with helicopters and killing squads of his soldiers. All of a sudden, in the middle of my vacation, the town of Rostov-Don was under Wagner control and taken over from the Russians. Interestingly enough to me, there was no public response. People went shopping, they took photos, some of them took selfies with some of the soldiers. They were just there. Nobody seemed to care. Rostov-Don was captured with basically no violence. As far as I'm aware, there was no violence. Once it was captured, however, a convoy of armored vehicles started heading for Moscow. Tanks weren't driving on the road. Instead, they were loaded up on trucks. The convoy was not ready for combat, actually. They seemed to be going as fast as they could. On the way, they got attacked by some helicopters. It seems their losses were not nearly as severe as the Russian losses. The Russians lost a command and control plane along with the 10 commanding personnel that were on board, and at least 3 helicopters. Command personnel and rotary aviation are 2 things that the Russians are quickly running out of, and they need desperately. Hasty defenses were being set up around Moscow around this time, and just about every government official that had their own private jet was currently on them getting out of Moscow proper. Wagner got around to the halfway point, and suddenly they turned around. They seemed to have caught the government completely off guard, and they seemed to be staging quite the coup, and they stopped. Now there's the obvious question, could have they taken over the government? No. In my opinion, they did not have nearly enough force. They would have been slowed down. The government had already left at that point, so an actual coup was impossible. It's also said that the deal between Prigozhin and Russia was staged by Lushenko, not Putin or anybody else in the Russian government. And while Lushenko is a Russian puppet, that's a little bit of a power play. You might look a little weak if you have to have another country's president come and call off a person coming for your head. But the deal that was brokered, Prigozhin and his forces were to be exiled effectively out to Belarus. He was still allowed to be the head of the Wagner Group. He was allowed to do all of his operations in Africa, and his troops were also allowed to sign contracts with the Russian government. Effectively, on the surface, it looked like he got a really, really good deal. And when he was seen in a car afterwards, people took selfies with him. There was a crowd. They seemed to be rather excited. He was kind of like a celebrity, which is kind of odd. Let's think about it for a second. Especially these locals. Your town was just occupied by technically an enemy military force, and the people just seemed to be completely fine with it. Almost like they were celebrating with heroes. That's not exactly a great look. When I first recorded it, I'm re-recording it as we speak at the moment, I thought that he was going to live. Since then, I've come to the realization that the raiding of his mansion and the arrests of so many people that were either close or loyal to him was not necessarily a coincidence. The thing that did seem to be surprising to me, even now, is that I originally had thought that he was not murdered, killed, because that he carried the possibility of maybe being a martyr, which usually killing a martyr is a very bad idea. So with that in my head, once he did die, I was a little confused. But now I'm a lot less confused.
My final message. Goodbye.
Eventually, fate caught up with our dear hot dog salesman. He met the world's most insidious killer, gravity. Plus some jet fuel, of course, but he got the honor of falling from the tallest window that they could find him. Now, there are 2 very important questions that are going to come up here. One being much more important than the other, but we're going to go with the less important question first. How did he die? What caused the plane to crash? Well, it's been hypothesized that it could have been air defenses, or that it also could have been a bomb. I personally go for the bomb theory. As it looked like it had lost a wing, you could see the little, what looked like smoke, which was the fuel venting. A small explosion on the wing could have decoupled it, and that would have caused the crash that we saw. That also could have been a missile. A missile would have also done that. Although you would see more of a trail with a missile, and missiles have a large enough explosion to usually cause fires. If you look back earlier in the video, and I'm going to show the footage now, you can see the command plane that Wagner shot down. I think it might be a little bit bigger, but it's going to be similar sized, I imagine. But you can see that this one is going down on a fireball. His is not going down a ball, which would suggest a more surgical and smaller explosion. Although that's all hypothetical. Those are really the only two theories of what would bring down the plane. And I personally go with bomb. Because it shouldn't be too hard. Stick a bomb on a wing. Especially as an assassination tactic. It's going to be a lot more. I mean, you're blowing up a private jet, but it is going to be a little bit more low-key than firing a missile at it. Now, this brings us to the second question. Is he dead? No, that's not the question. He's probably dead. He might not be, but I'm pretty sure he's dead. The second question is, who did it and why? It was probably Putin. Let's be honest, it was probably Putin. I could say that I don't know, which, that is honest. I do not know, but it's probably Putin. Why? I listed these earlier. Going against the government publicly and then going against the government militarily. Those are two big points. Maybe it wasn't Putin. Maybe it was one of his intelligence services. Either way, it's very likely it was the Russian government. Possibly. Maybe it was Ukraine. There could be some Ukrainians that wanted revenge for war crimes, but I don't know. And as for the most important question, what will this do? I also don't know. I started this 6 days ago when he died, and I don't know what's going to happen. There are a bunch of guys with guns, with almost their entire leadership destroyed. There is a public that seems rather upset, or should I say mourning. They're not necessarily upset. They're just not happy that he died. They don't seem upset about at anyone yet. And I mean, I don't know. A lot of things could happen from this. It's definitely a political upset. As terms of why, if Putin did it, which I personally believe that he ordered for it, it could be one of two things. Russia did a small purge of upper military leadership, especially those that were loyal or more closely tied to Wagner. And it's likely that they're cleaning up dissent with the objective to silence dissent. There are two different purposes for that. There can be silencing dissent so that they can leave peacefully and try to turn it into a win politically without people yelling at them that it wasn't. Or they can commit more forces without having people point out that it is a sunk cost fallacy at this point. Or petty revenge. I'm not sure. I don't have any inside information to share with you at the moment, and I'll probably make a follow-up to this video in maybe a month, few weeks, maybe? I want to do some other videos in the meantime, mostly because this was just kind of a pain to make. But yeah, that might be a little disappointing, but that's all I got for you. I'm gonna hand it off to the editor here, so he can babble on about how the video is a pain to edit or whatever, and I'll see you next time. First of all, I'd like to apologize for taking so incredibly long with this video. I didn't actually have this video worked on for 5 months. I had around 7 other scripts that I had written and then recorded and then half edited, and they never became videos for one reason or another. This one was almost going to be scrapped. As you can tell, I'm not happy about how it turned out. It's very sad and poor. I completely forgot how to edit over the past 5 months, and I had to relearn. I learned some new things, don't get me wrong, but it's very sad. If you don't like it, I agree with you. I don't like it either, but I needed to get something out, so this is the something. The news for me is just very simple news. Gotta put down my dog soon. That's been weighing on me for most of the video. It's been a little difficult to work. We also lost my cat, thought he died, but he's okay. So that has slowed down the progress of the video. Most of my videos take about, a day to make in total? 2 days to research, a day to make everything else. It's pretty quick, but this one took 6 days to just edit. So it's been a little, sucky. But for a channel update, I would like to say that the 50 subscriber special that I was planning on making a billion years ago is going to be one of the next videos I make. I've decided that watching people getting executed by sledgehammer is not necessarily a very nice way to live, and so there's some videos coming up that are going to be a little bit more lighthearted, possibly, less sledgehammer executions or people actually dying. I'll do a little bit of fun projects, but I'll also do some more Ukraine stuff. The next military or Ukraine video, which I'm back into Ukraine finally. Military history is a little hard to get into, I've noticed. I got a little burnt out from making videos too quickly. But the next thing I want to do is Ukrainians doing their own strategic bombing campaigns, because I think that what's happening currently is actually quite interesting. But that's for another video, not right now. If I start rambling, it'll be another 5 minutes that I have to animate for, which you've noticed I'm not going to because I hate making visuals. It's my least favorite thing. But yeah, that video is gonna happen. It's gonna be about an hour long. The 50 subscriber special I did, that is. And yeah, thanks for being here. Sorry that it took me so long, and sorry that after all this long it turned out to be garbage, but I'll produce some more garbage in the meantime. Have a great rest of your day, night, or end of the world. I don't know what's happening.